Hello, everyone. I'm Natalie Marshall, Director of the Flint River Regional Library System, and welcome to this panel, Books That Bring Us Together. This panel highlights books that are perfect for shared reading experiences, stories that invite discussion, spark debate, and bring readers together across genre and styles. I'm so excited to introduce our authors. Mara Brock Akil, The Revelation of Dionne Daphne, Storehouse Voices, Storehouse Publishing. When a late night knock at her door sends successful Dionne spiraling, she will journey into her past to figure out how to approach her future with a handsome near stranger by her side. Sarah Addison Allen, Paper Ghosts, St. Martin's Press Macmillan. Generations of women have inhabited Westerhouse, trying without success to break their streak of being unlucky in love. When Wilhelmina calls her granddaughter Bailey back to their small town, they may finally have the chance to wipe away their secrets. Bonnie Garmus, Peck and Peck, Scribner, Simon Schuster. Batter Gray, unfortunate twin and erstwhile poet, takes a job at the firm of Peck and Peck, only to discover that nothing in his life or his work is truly what it seems. Isabel J. Kim, Sublimation, Tour Books, Macmillan. In this version of our world, crossing a border can create a copy of someone known as an instance. When Soo-young and her instance come face to face for the first time in years, they must decide what it means to reintegrate their two versions and what it means to refuse. Audrey Niffenegger, Life Out of Order, Deluxe Limited Edition, Hanover Square Press, HarperCollins. Audrey is unable to join us today, but we'll play a short video after we get started so you can learn more about her book. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you, everyone. We have so many wonderful books to talk about today that I would love to just jump right in and start doing some questions. Mara, let's ask you a question first here. You have a significant background in screenwriting and television production. What made you to decide to write a novel? What made you decide to write this novel in particular? And what differences have you found between writing for the page or the screen?
I think it's important to, first of all, I'm so happy to be here. I'm really thrilled. I do want to shout out to my late Aunt Veretta, who was a librarian and who taught me how to read. I someone who struggled to read early on in life, and the fact that I'm a writer and talking and sharing the stage with these amazing authors is a privilege to me. That said, I chose to, I was actually there's a good story. There are good stories in a bad moment of our lives called COVID. COVID slowed us down. COVID made us think about new ideas. And I was approached by my editor, my publisher editor, Chelsea Johns, and she said, Mara, I think your work, your voice, excuse me, is time to translate to the page. And it's funny enough, when I was in high school, I thought my career would be a journalist and then I would write a book. But I went this other route. And what was a gift in that moment was that there was a script that I had that I knew, the nature of this business, I would never be able to sell it until I wrote the script. And that script kept getting kicked down the curb. As you grow your career, you kind of start to pull yourself in one particular box to be responsible for what you have agreed to do and want to do. That moment in COVID, that moment to reconsider that notion that I had with that call inspired me. And really what I found out was I knew I probably couldn't even sell that script because the limitations in which I think Black women story narratives are valued, period. But I knew it was an opportunity for me to get this story out, which also was challenging because I was interested in the interiority of this character, a great deal of the masking that we do in life. And I found a beautiful new canvas to express. I think where I do very well is taking the truth through fiction, but also deep character, complex humanity work. And I got to have the joy of giving full breath to a character was so delightful, as much as it was scary. Did I answer that question? I think I
Yes,
did.
absolutely
Okay.
fabulous. No, that makes complete sense. Thank you so much.
Thank you for asking.
Um, Sarah, Paper Ghosts is your eighth novel. What has changed about the way you write over the course of your career, and what has stayed the same?
I think the core of what I write has remained the same. I have this cauldron of different genres of magical realism and a little bit of romance, women's fiction, foodie lit, southern fiction, all sort of stirred together. And I don't think that has changed because I think we as writers are ultimately influenced by who we are as readers, and that's the truth for me. I just couldn't pick one genre, so I put them all together. Um, but I think my books have changed as I have changed, as I've gotten older. And I think that's inevitable. The more we learn, the more we experience, the more depth of emotion we can put in because things we're not aware of when we're young, we have no context. I can see very clearly my first four books were romance heavy. They had more romance than they probably had anything. And I, when I was diagnosed in my 30s with late stage breast cancer, and I took time off for treatment, when I came back to writing, the tenor of my writing had changed. Not there was still romance and there was, still all the other genres, but there were elements of things like grief or how to move on. And the last book before Paper Ghosts, my last book, Other Birds, which was in 2022, I took another long period off when my mom and my sister died. So um, that book became an exploration of the ghosts we hold on to, the people we've lost and how to let go. So I think my books have changed because I have changed. But I think, fiction in general is not real. I mean, it's made up. But I think what readers respond to most is the idea of emotional truth. And I like to think I've grown in my emotional truth.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Bonnie, the protagonist and subject matter of Peck and Peck have a real absurdist flair, kind of a cross between Bleak House and a Marx Brothers comedy. What path led you to this particular story and narrator?
Well, I came from the world of advertising, and the idea for the story came about a long time ago in 2009. I was in just such a bad mood because I was really mad at work all the time. I was working mostly in the technology sector, and it seemed to me that technology had moved from a place of innovation and excitement and doing the right thing and don't be evil and be different and think different to arrogance, greed. The bottom line is all that matters. Being wealthy is all that matters. And I was really incredibly disillusioned. Around that time, I started to, for whatever reason, read a little bit of poetry. I am not a poet. And the more I read of poetry and its economy and its wealth of wisdom and information, the more enchanted became with the idea that publishing is one of the last strongholds of our culture. Now, it's about to be swallowed by AI unless we do something. So I decided to write this book about this and set it in the 80s and set it in a publishing house, publishing the best poetry in the world. But the poetry house itself is extremely dysfunctional. I know you won't recognize that at all from publishing. And it is extremely dysfunctional, and it is a place of substance. They are still looking for morality and substance. And it seems to me in our society, those two things have taken a back seat to arrogance and greed. And so I decided to have a young man right out of college in the 80s move to New York City where he has never been. He's from a small town, and he encounters this company called Peck and Peck. He gets a job there. He's a poet aficionado, and he actually doesn't write poetry. He has written one poem, but that is it. He is a poetry reader, and that's what I had sort of become, a poetry reader, and I'm not as skilled as he is. He has an ear for poetry. He's like the editors. He has a way of determining what has substance and lasting value. And so when he enters Peck and Peck, he thinks he's with his people. And yet he finds out that the editor-in-chief of Peck and Peck is a bully, an arrogant asshole, basically. And this guy only cares about the bottom line, which is exactly opposite from what he expected. And so within the book, there's not only this theme of opposites that runs throughout the book, but this idea of, well, what are we going to do about these people who are telling us that we have to adopt these technologies, who are telling us that our jobs as writers or actors or musicians, or really any kind of work of this day, even coders are worried that we don't matter anymore. And so this book is about somebody who has to wake up and do something about it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Isabel, though Sublimation is your debut novel, you've been publishing short stories for about 5 years. How does the writing process differ for you, if it does? And what about this particular story made you decide to go long form?
So the big difference is that with short fiction, I feel like I can put maybe 2 or 3 ideas and develop one character. And then with a novel, I feel like I have the space to really like bounce people off of each other and then not just talk about a couple of things, but like talk about like 10 or 15 things that I want to talk about that all happen in this universe. And then so Sublimation started out as a short story. And I try to end short stories at about the quarter mark of where a novel would continue on, basically leave people with like the big idea. And with the short story that became Sublimation, that was basically, okay, so Sublimation is set in a universe where when you cross a border, you split into two, one person who stays in a home country, the other goes onto the new one. And it follows a woman who goes back to Korea for her grandfather's funeral. Her other self is waiting. And I'm gonna give spoilers here, but it's fine. It's like a quarter mark of the book spoilers. They end up reintegrating because her Korean self really wanted to do that, and she very much didn't. And that is where I leave the short story on this incredibly unsatisfying ending that really makes a point about like, hey man, you don't always get what you want. But then I finished it, and I thought, man, there is so much more about this world that I want to explore because like I felt like I hadn't got to the end of her story because she was the sort of person where if something bad happened to her, she would try and go to any lengths to erase that from having happened. And I also didn't have the space in the short story to really like expand upon how like the idea of instancing would affect everything, like history, politics, immigration, the entire concept of what a border would be and how people would interface with it. So that was all what kind of inspired me to keep writing and turn this from I want to say like 6,000 word short story into a full novel.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. It was a massive, expansive world. So I think that really came through there. And we do have a short video from Audrey. As I said, she is not here with us, but we have something from her.
Hi, I'm Audrey Niffenegger, and my new book, Life Out of Order, is a sequel, prequel, extension of my first book, The Time Traveler's Wife. It's the continuation of the story of Henry and Claire de Tamble and their daughter Alba, as well as family and friends, who are, all of them, trying to figure out how to exist in a very tumultuous world, a world that's falling apart, for want of a better way to put it. In this world, the bonds between people are the main thing that keeps everything rolling forward and going along. Everybody is trying to make art, trying to help each other, trying to understand the modern predicament. Y'all sent me a few questions, which I'll try to answer. What do you feel Life Out of Order wants to most say about how our identities are shaped by our circumstances, including the ability to time travel? I think that our identities are somewhat hardwired into us. Every baby I've ever encountered is very much themselves from the get-go. But I do feel that people's life circumstances certainly are expressing each identity. One of the interesting things about being a fiction writer is that you create the obstacles for the characters, as well as working out how the characters will respond to the obstacles. One of the joys of spending 13 years writing a book is that you have plenty of time to create very inventive and daunting obstacles, and getting to know your characters better and better, so that by the end I felt that everything that happened in the book was inevitable. Each character became more and more themselves the longer I wrote about them, and that's been a real luxury, to have so much time to get to know each character. In this novel, many characters speak from their own points of view. Was this your intention from the beginning of your writing process, or did it grow as the storyline became more clear? In The Time Traveler's Wife, Henry and Claire each speak in the first person from their own points of view. This book has six different characters who are point of view characters. All of them are family members. They're all, in one way or another, either by birth or by marriage, part of Henry and Claire's family. The decision to make someone a first-person character, a lot of it has to do with giving and taking information, withholding things from the reader, giving things to the reader, and passing knowledge back and forth between the characters, and deciding, whose experience the reader will inhabit most intimately. I could have spent another 13 years writing this book and given every single person in it first-person point of view quite happily, but there have to be limits. So I do feel like I had a good time writing the people that I did choose to give first-person point of view to. The cyclical nature of time serves as a touch point for your characters in both small and large ways. Do you feel it will incline readers to be more careful or more reckless with time after contemplating the role it plays in your story? Boy, I don't give myself that kind of power. I think readers have their own relationship to time and their lives, and for the period that they're reading the book, I think they'll experience time in a certain way. But I think that the main message that I want to convey, the thing that I would love people to take away, is I encourage people to make things and to be in the moment and to care for each other as deeply as possible. That's really the main message of the book. Thank you.
And thank you so much to Audrey, even though she could not be with us here in person today, to be able to offer that up about her book, her work. And let's see, Sarah, if you would, you're up. as we dig into these books, I could just keep talking about them for hours. But Westerhouse, as well as being a primary setting for the book, acts as a kind of inanimate bonus character. How did you envision the house when you created it for the novel? Do you use visual references, or did you go entirely based on your imagination?
For most books, I go entirely on my imagination, but for Westerhouse in particular, I came across in the magazine Southern Living, I came across a federal style home. It was 3 stories, it had black shutters, and it had a sunroom, and I thought, wow, I wonder what's going on in there. It just seemed like a fortress, but it was a beautiful fortress. So that was my inspiration for Westerhouse in Paper Ghosts. But for other books, I generally start with, like in Garden Spells, it was a Queen Anne style house. In Other Birds, there was a condo that was converted horse stalls in the shape of a horseshoe. So once I have that idea, then I go into the research of, what architectural details do I need and things like that. But setting is very, very important to me. I am a seat of my pants writer. I can't plot to save me. I've tried and it's disastrous. So I have to, put some horrible stuff onto the page that is not worthy of publication, and then I have to deep dive into it and then make it beautiful. But one thing I always have before I start anything is a setting, because it is almost another character in my books.
Well, it definitely worked here. It puts you right in the moment, right in the storyline.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mara, your book takes place more than 30 years ago in 1991. What felt most important about tying your narrative to that time period, and how did you decide to set the scene for readers who may be too young to remember it firsthand?
Mm. You know, my book, I mentioned earlier that I like to take the truth through fiction, but I also like to start things off with a question. And I've been wondering about the progress of women in general, and more specifically in the area about the ownership of our bodies, the sexual agency that we have. And I wondered, you know, are we really experiencing sexual liberation, or is the aftermath of what being born and raised in a country that was rooted in violence still about, especially at a time when our bodies are political, um, uh, uh, not just fodder, but I mean real impact on our lives about who who has ownership to our bodies in a myriad of ways. And so I always think about that, and what do we learn from the past that is right for the future, that is right for right now. And I remember, my truth, I remember trying to express my sexual liberation. When HIV and AIDS came about, it was no longer just a gay man's disease. And even that we started that way, that it was something that could affect all of us. And I remember those 2 weeks of my life when we took the test. You had to wait 2 weeks before you can get the result. And I remember that to this day. And one of the exercises that you had to do is you had to list, because it was a contact disease, and how they're going to get control of it is to find out, just like COVID, who have you been in contact with and how do you protect yourselves from this? But that exercise of looking back at your sexual partners was something that I wanted to remind the future. First of all, we pioneered that for you guys. We have moved, there are points of progression, but where are we stagnant? Where are we doing? So my book takes place on, there was a lot of themes that are of the past that are not that far different than our now. And my book takes place on the night that this character, who is in New York, young Black woman, experiencing financial freedoms, experiencing this idea of I can do bad all by myself type of energy, working in a magazine publication, up for a new promotion, finally lets go of the idea that her boyfriend of 5 years, took those precious 5 years, those late 20s, early 30s years, is not coming back to pick up his last few things. She finally goes out with her girlfriend for a great night and brings home a guy to have sex for the first time. And on that same night, he knocks on the door and says he's HIV positive. And it makes this young lady turn back in those 2 weeks, this life that looked picture perfect, in the way that we, again, the past to the now, how much we project so much of ourselves, especially in social media, the perfections are the best part of our life, and how much are we masking and not dealing with as a way to promote more of who we think we are or would want to be, but have no interest in actually building structurally. And so I think a lot of times, just like now, we have to go look back in order to go forward. And so I chose to put it in the 90s. And how funny and how apropos that the 90s is the hottest thing right now, and everything. And I think that's because being so close to the future and having to rebuild it, all you have to do while you're building is those past stories. And we have an opportunity to share our wisdom from the past into the future, as we start to rebuild it. And I thought, what better way than talk about a young woman's sexual agency and her life agency, by going back and facing the trauma of her life and coming back healed and anew. And I'm always going to have aspiration in my books. I'm going to have humor in my books. I think one of the ways I know Black people in America have dealt with the pain we have endured for centuries is sometimes through humor and still choosing love. And even in the complicated nature of all of us, there is still love in the middle of what could be the worst 2 weeks of this young woman's life.
Absolutely. And that ticking time clock format does add a great sense of urgency to the book.
Yes. Thank you.
Absolutely. Isabel, you talked about this, you touched on this a little bit before, but you've created a kind of alternative history for your novel, interspersing those historical, scientific, and cultural facts about instancing into the main narrative. Did you develop both parts of that book in parallel, or did you really start with one and then flow to the other? How did you develop that deeper world?
Mostly in parallel because so each act of sublimation is basically paired with an accompanying like legend, myth, folktale that has been rewritten to kind of fit the sublimation universe. Like for example, I think one of the most prominent ones is like I rewrite snippets of the Odyssey so that Odysseus instances when he leaves home. He does not instance when he leaves the war. And so that kind of, and then each of the like legends or myths or folk tales that I like rewrite kind of provide like a thematic parallel to the journey that or the question that the main character of that act is grappling with. Like for example, in the Odysseus one, it's very much do I stay or do I go? And what does it mean to like go on a journey? And is this a good thing that I'm doing? Is this a bad thing I'm doing? What am I going to see when I get home? Um, and then so that was kind of key to the novel because like by including these pieces of alternate history, um, I had the idea for including this at the beginning because I had hoped to illustrate like I am rewriting all of the way human history works in this book, and I cannot. It's like 380 pages. That's not enough time to do that. But I'd hoped to kind of illustrate by including these snippets how deeply instancing was like integrated into their world in the same way that like death, birth, falling in love, the moon, the stars, all of those things are integrated into ours, and like how the building blocks of mythology are kind of based on objective facts about reality, but also how human beings are like driven to derive meaning from narrative and like the world around them because like instancing is both like a psychological phenomenon and also like a physical phenomenon for these people. And so yeah, like I kind of wanted to make that point.
Yeah. One of the bits that I also loved was when you talked about it in terms of like, oh, this is not how it is in the movies or in a drama that, we're like, oh, it should be like it is on TV. And so it's very much like a real world thing, but then it has to do with this splitting of people into two. So I thought that was great.
Yeah, like there are webtoons where people instance in this universe, and that's the thing that the characters do read.
Exactly, exactly. And Bonnie, excuse me. So Batter's great acknowledged loss is the twin brother that he never meets. While his story is overrun with brothers, often twins, some friends and some enemies, and some by birth, and then others created by circumstance. What aspect of those relationships did you draw on most to create this story? Because it's very meaningful within the story.
Yeah, I think twins are really interesting. I've known a lot of twins and even triplets in my life, and I did a bunch of research and discovered very surprisingly that a lot of twins don't like each other. And that is because they're all vying for their parents' attention. It's much more of a competition than a regular brother or sister. But when I was writing this, I thought about twins being a perfect example of kind of the polarization that has happened in our society. And so underlying my book, because it's based on poetic structure, are two different things. There's the couplet and there's the tercet. The couplet is a two-line poetic structure where often it's based on meter and often, but not always, the second line rhymes. Well, it reminded me of twins. What if they don't rhyme? What if they are actually opposites and even enemies? And that is who the Pecks are. They are enemies. And so I wanted to explore this whole idea of the weight of expectation because I don't know. Before I started writing this book, I thought all twins were friends for life and got along great. And then I met my next door neighbor in England, and he's like, I have a identical twin, and I haven't spoken to him in 25 years. Yeah. And so that really surprised me. And the more I thought about this, the more I thought it reflected our current society. You know, Republicans don't talk to Democrats and everything is black and white, or people say yes or people say no, but there's nothing, there's no in between. And so getting back to this idea of couplets and opposites and things, I thought it'd be really interesting just to look at the world that way and figure out how to get to what I call, you know how we always say there are two sides to every story? Well, no, there are more than two sides. There are at least three. And that's where the tercet comes in. The tercet is a triple line stanza. And that is a little bit more surprising. It's also the most stable, one of the most stable poetic structures. And so throughout the book, there are couplets, but there are tercets because this building I've created is a triangular building. And there are pillars in society that keep us upright, and that's a triangular situation. One of the pillars that keeps us upright, though, is history, and that one almost always it's been damaged somehow, and it's a little bit shorter than the other legs. So those are the sorts of things I wanted to bring into it in terms of twins, but even go a little bit further towards the triplets.
That is fascinating. Yes, absolutely. I like the triple idea as well. Mara, your book, and you've talked about this a little bit, highlights the significant tension between female pain and female joy. What do you want to express to readers about how we find our way from one to the other? And what do we leave behind and what do we bring with us?
Thank you for these questions. They were very fun to reflect on. And the funny thing to me, one of the joys I get out of writing is often, like I said, I will take the ingredients of my life, and whether that be through lived experience or books or someone else's story or whatever, is that I can translate it, right? But what's interesting to me is during the process, I get a gift, and my book told me something. It revealed something to me. I had my own revelation, and it was very cathartic in the writing that I realized that in a lot of ways, where our mothers can fail us, not because they're intended to, but the choices that they make, how their choices impact us. That Girlfriends, which is funny, I'm most known for my series Girlfriends. It's celebrating its 25th anniversary. I wrote that back in the early 2000s, or in 2000, late 90s. And the show called Girlfriends, I now better understand having written this book. I wrote that show 25 years ago. I have my latest crop of fans are 16 years old, and I'm just now realizing what I really wrote in that by writing this book. And that is, I think, a good friend, a good girlfriend actually becomes the surrogate parent to us when we don't have the tools to parent ourselves yet, and certainly cleaning up a little bit of the complexity of parenting that we all are going to be responsible for. So we should all be encouraging our children to find good places to land, and not always have to pay for it in therapy. But that said, not that I'm shunning that. I just feel like that was my revelation about taking pain to joy. And because we choose to sit and share, we actually are creating pathways for healing. As not only that, but sometimes what their real role is they become your mother. They become the mother you didn't have or not brave enough to have for yourself just yet. The other question that I really loved and appreciated was what do I leave behind and what we bring with us? My book is, I would love to leave behind. I would love for Dionne to lead a conversation around it's time for us to confront our shame and let it go. And she's willing to reveal the shame in her life that we can maybe reflect on. And then because of that journey, who helped you through that, including what you did for yourself, what others have done for you, even the gifts of those who have betrayed you allow you to see how strong you are and willing to fight for your life, for who you really are. And I think I think that we could look back and alchemize these relationships by accepting those who help us get through, accepting, holding space enough for you to find yourself in the midst of that, and letting and sort of finding space and forgiveness for others, which really makes more space for you. And so I want to leave shame to open up more pathways for love. And that is, I think, a message that I think we all need at any particular time in humanity's history, but certainly now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bonnie, you've talked a lot about poetry and how central it is to your work. And for Batter, you know, as you talk about his as a person who's written one poem but has loved many, poetry is the essence of life encapsulated. It's messy and orderly. Do you share this relationship with poetry, or do you have a completely separate one? And who's your favorite poet, if you have one, and why?
That's a dangerous question, Natalie.
No, it's terrible. Absolutely.
You know, poetry isn't something that I kind of sought. I think for me, just like, you know, when I wrote Lessons in Chemistry, I wasn't a chemist, but I wanted to use chemistry as the underlying unifying principle. And I wanted to use poetry in this book as the unifying underlying principle. And that meant that I had to actually study the form. And the more I studied it, the more that it just hit me that, you know, we're all novelists, and we're really lucky to be novelists, because how often do you see anyone reading a book of poems on the tube or on the subway or on a bus? Never. I mean, we're in a really good position compared to poets. And yet what they offer us is so profound and so astonishing in so many ways that I decided that I wanted to spend a little part of my life promoting what it is they do. And what I discovered is we celebrate poetry exactly 3 times: at a wedding, at a funeral, at the inauguration. And that is about it. And not all inaugurations have poetry. So it started to make me wonder, how does poetry exist? How does it persist? And after I studied it a while, I realized that poetry has within it an ability to defy extinction. These are lessons that I think humans right now could really stand to learn. This art form is able to evolve so effortlessly through these people who write it very well. And you know, to be honest, there are really a lot of bad poets. Of course there are. But the ones that are really excellent take us to a different level and teach us that we are going to survive, that we are going to persist, that we're going to get past these bad times, that things are going to be okay. And you know what? They do it in a page. Meanwhile, I'm writing 436 pages to say exactly the same thing. So I have a lot of respect for poets. In terms of my favorite poet, I have probably 1,200 at this point, but I'm going to name 3 right now who mean a lot to me. One is dead, unfortunately, Nikki Giovanni. I think she was a genius. And I discovered her when I was, I think, in 9th grade, and she just blew me away. And then Ada Limon is our past poet laureate. I can't find a poem of hers that I don't think is brilliant. She is amazing, and when she reads, she's incredible. My current favorite fascination is a young woman named Lynn Penny. She's a Scottish poet. You should just Google her or watch her on YouTube. I mean, she'll just sweep you away. And her performance, her words, her fierceness, I mean, I just love them. So anyway, I'm a little jealous of poets. They're, you know, they can be done, like, if they want, in a day. Although some poets, they tell me that their poem took 6 months to write. So there's that.
Yeah, absolutely. They make it look so easy, and yet it has to be so incredibly difficult to create.
Yeah.
100%, 100%. Isabel, in your book, chapters from the point of view of an instance are in second person, so that's the you for all of us who have to have refresh, while the chapters from a reintegrated person are in the third person. It's too many persons. Can you talk about the decision that was made and what you really wanted readers to experience through that changing POV depending on the character style?
Yeah, so first, I think the second person is unfairly maligned, but I acknowledge that you can only use it in specific circumstances, and mostly people aren't encountering it enough in fiction to really like be comfortable with it. And that I think is its strength because the second person is great for creating a sort of sense of like alienated intimacy. And I wanted everyone reading the second person sections, which is like the instance talking, to have that sense of being like separated from their sense of self, but also to have like a super close point of view so we can see how they feel about everything, why they're making the decisions that they do. And I kind of also like the idea that the second person sections are a memory that the reintegrated person is like kind of thinking about and kind of viewing like after the event of their reintegration.
Mhm.
And then the sections where the person is reintegrated when they're one person again, those are in third person because that is easier for everyone to read. And you're supposed to be getting a more objective view with kind of both personalities integrated. And if you read the book, you can see that that is not all, integration is not always the right word here, but it's supposed to kind of provide a contrast to the weirdness of the second person and like kind of show that like the way people think about the world is different based on like what stage of life they're in or like what has happened to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing I really liked was at the very end when it switched from third person limited to third person omniscient.
Hmm.
And so it's almost like a newscaster broadcasting in to be
Hmm.
so these are the facts as they happened.
Yeah. Because like now we have all the information and now we're not just so in somebody's head because all of the decisions have now been made.
Yes, absolutely. The second person brought something really unique to it. You're right. It doesn't get a lot of favor, but I thought it really made the novel. And Sarah, one of the major themes of yours is recurring patterns through generations and how you resolve the mismatch between intentions and outcomes. That having great intentions doesn't always mean having great outcomes. What does it cost Wills to finally break free of the past? And what do you feel like she gains? And do you think that Bailey has truly broken the curse of the Wester women?
When I read the question that you sent, it was like I'd never actually thought about it in those terms. But I don't think that Bailey, the granddaughter, is actually the one breaking the curse. I think Wilhelmina, or Wills, as she's known in the first part of the book, is the one who does it. And she does it at great cost, but she goes about it in a way that causes more trauma for her family. But it's she made the decision and she said, this curse, this generational trauma that has happened to our family, needs to stop. And she doesn't know how to stop it, but to withdraw and to have her own son live his own life, thinking that anything would be better than her. Anything would be better than to be in the Wester house with her. So she sends him away, and he ends up having a child, but his wife ends up dying. So he and his child, Wilhelmina's granddaughter, come back to the Wester house. And this terrifies Wilhelmina because she thinks that her granddaughter is going to become her. And Wilhelmina is a divisive figure in Paper Ghost, and I didn't want her to become the I don't know, the villain of the story because who she was, it was a product of her grandmother and her grandmother before her, and that is the way generational trauma works. I read a quote once that resonated with me, and it sort of stayed with me the whole time I was writing this book, and it was just because our mother didn't break all generational curses doesn't mean she didn't break none. And I thought about that in the context of my own mother. Any kind of trauma that a family has, takes generations to form and it takes generations to heal. So Wilhelmina herself did not stop it, but she put a break in it just long enough that the generations that came after her would not deal with the intense amount of trauma that she had to endure. So much so that, I wanted the first part of the book to be Wilhelmina's 18-year-old self, so the reader did see that who she became was formed well before she was born. And the reason she lived in this house with this ghost was because she didn't know any other way to not only protect herself but her family while at the same time holding on to some semblance of happiness, the only happiness that she had. So I don't think her granddaughter broke it. I think the grandmother paused it enough so that later generations could have a chance to heal.
Yeah, I can see that. So instead, it's intentions, appearances, and outcomes. That the intention and the outcome, she had to put in a false appearance almost in the middle of
Absolutely.
that to get there.
Right.
Absolutely fantastic. Oh my gosh. Well, we're getting ready to wrap up here. One question I did want to ask you guys, because this is our books about being together. The bringing together here is, what do you think makes a good book discussion? What makes a good book for discussion? Is that something you think about when you're writing, or is that something you put completely to the side? How you think that readers will respond either individually or as a group, leading a book discussion or having a book club or something like that? Oh, yeah, I can think about it. I'm going to
Okay.
call.
Oh,
I'll go first, and I'll just say it sort of dovetails into what I said with in response to my first question is that I
Mhm.
think as writers we make stuff up, but if the emotion is real, it resonates with readers. And I don't think that's something we think about. I think that's just something we experience, and that we put so much of ourselves and our blood, sweat, and tears into our books that I think it's naturally a response as a human response that when you read something that someone has put so much emotion into, it's a sympathetic response.
Absolutely.
I'll just say that when I write, I don't think about a group of readers because I'm not in a book group, but I
Mhm.
always think about one person sitting on the tube. I live in England, sitting on the tube and reading, and everybody on the tube still reads actual books. And it's
Mhm.
really cool. So when I think about a group of people, I think what an honor that a bunch of people would sit around and drink wine and talk about what you've written. That had literally never occurred to me before. I feel really foolish saying that, but it's really true. And I
Makes
think
sense.
I think it's really important in a book to allow avenues for all sorts of people to be welcomed in, whether I always try to put different things, always, this is my second book. I try to put in things that allow other people to see themselves in the story, to create a little door to enter.
Absolutely.
I always feel like as a storyteller, we are brave enough to put, in some cases, we hide behind our characters, but we are brave enough to start a conversation. I always see my work be on screen and now in book, so I'm happy to say that, is a conversation starter, someone who wants to talk beyond the weather, beyond the politics sometimes, and beyond the movie they just saw, but to offer, to be a to share something unique to the group. Funny enough, I think we gather sometimes we like it's safer to engage off of someone else's story because we're still very vulnerable about our own. We are so afraid of being judged and a whole bunch of other things that sometimes we just hold back. But I hope we're in an era of people inspired to tell their stories and inspired to leave their life on the ledger, whether they do it in memoir or whether they do it in fiction. I think fiction's fun because sometimes we're really not all that interesting as just a total subject as is. And bringing your full life perspective and different points of view, I think helps to really reflect this thing that we're all digging for and all excavating is really the enjoying the beauty of our complexity, of our really accepting ourselves, surrendering to ourselves, releasing ourselves. I think this is what the compound nature of stories being told over and over again. And I just, for the record, Bonnie, I love what you said about the poets, about it. Poetry has the ability to defy extinction. And I think what they can do is they're holding on to the essence of us. And I think that's what people are really loving to discuss amongst themselves, because even as readers, we miss a lot in the first read. And sometimes someone else's perspective helps us see and understand the text even better. Um,
Absolutely.
Yeah, I spent probably way longer thinking about the reader impact than I should have with Sublimation because like normally I don't, but then Sublimation itself was very much like about my background and I was very much like I wanted to hammer home the feeling of being somewhere else or being like a foreigner to the reader who is probably from a different background than I am. So I spent a lot of time trying to think about how to turn my specific experience into something universal. And I was not thinking about people talking to their friends about this, which I should have thought about that. But then what's been cool is that like what I've noticed is is that if you write something with the intention of sharing it, other people will turn back and like people who've read Sublimation will come have read an arc will tell me about their family's experience, and I was not expecting that, and that's been very cool.
Absolutely. I think it's so interesting that you talk about not necessarily considering, not considering the reader, but putting what you need out there, saying something to the world, and then allowing us to talk about them together. And I think that's a treat to me as a reader who is not a writer, that you all have gifted us readers of the world. And so I want to thank you so much thank you for being here, and thank you for talking with me today. It's been delightful. And I want to thank the audience as well for joining us today. Next, we're going to have 2 concurrent sessions, Paths to Grow and Poetry Now. So please enjoy everything our Day of Dialogue has to offer and have an amazing day. Yay!